Jasmine Carter didn't just walk into the bank, she commanded it. Every step echoed power, poise, and precision. Yet within seconds of locking eyes with the teller behind the glass, that authority was questioned, dismissed, reduced to suspicion. "Do you even own a business?" the teller asked with a smirk, her voice laced with disbelief. The question wasn't about paperwork, it was about presence. Jasmine was black, successful, and unapologetically proud. And for Karen Whitman, the woman behind the counter, that combination didn't belong in her definition of a power player. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that Jasmine Carter wasn't just a client. She was one of the largest shareholders in the bank she was being mocked in. And this wasn't just about one wire transfer. It was about centuries of bias meeting its reckoning in a marble lobby under bright, fluorescent lights. The moment Karen tried to dismiss her, Jasmine made a quiet decision. Today, she wouldn't just push back. She would flip the entire institution on its head. Before we dive deeper, comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Jasmine Carter stood motionless at the counter, her presence now magnified by the tension humming through the bank lobby. Karen Whitman, the teller whose sneer had ignited this moment, still clutched Jasmine's paperwork in her hands. But it wasn't the documents she scrutinized. It was Jasmine herself. The tailored navy blazer, the designer heels, the immaculately styled hair. None of it mattered to Karen. Her gaze reduced Jasmine to a question mark. "I'm going to need additional verification," Karen said flatly, avoiding eye contact. "Something with your name. A checkbook? Maybe a business debit card?" Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly. She kept her breathing calm. "Everything you need is right in front of you. The account number, tax ID, business license, and my passport are all there." Karen's lips curled faintly. "We've had fraud issues before. Just doing my due diligence." The accusation hung in the air like a curse word. Fraud. It wasn't just about the transaction anymore. It was about legitimacy, about belonging. Jasmine could feel eyes drifting toward her from the waiting area. A security guard shifted his weight near the entrance. Tellers a few counters down slowed their pace, pretending not to listen, but they heard everything. This wasn't the first time Jasmine had been underestimated. She had sat in boardrooms where her ideas were stolen, walked into luxury showrooms where no one offered her help, and pitched to investors who smiled at her ideas but ignored her follow-up emails. She was used to it, but never numb to it. Today, however, it hit different. Today, she wasn't just a business owner. She was here representing the very institution that now questioned her. A silent fury boiled inside her chest. Not the kind that exploded, the kind that strategized. "Call your manager," she said, voice smooth, low, firm. Karen's eyes flashed, startled by the command in Jasmine's tone. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Call your manager." The bank lobby quieted. A mother hushed her child. A man in a suit lowered his newspaper. Something was shifting. Karen pressed the service button on her desk, clearly flustered now. Within moments, a tall man in a crisp charcoal suit approached. His name tag read, "Greg Simmons, branch manager." "Is there a problem here?" he asked, glancing between the two women. Karen jumped to explain. "This woman is trying to make a very large transfer, and I'm just trying to ensure everything's legitimate. You know we've had issues." Jasmine raised a hand, cutting her off with surgical precision. "Your employee has refused to process my transaction, despite full documentation. She's questioning whether I belong here, and based on her tone, it's clear what the real issue is." Greg's face tightened. The word tone struck him. He knew. The undertones of Karen's skepticism had spilled into outright disrespect. Now it was a personnel issue, a public relations issue, and a legal one. "Miss Whitman," he said, turning to Karen, "is that accurate?" Karen stammered. I was just trying to follow policy. We have standards and she doesn't have." "There is no policy that denies a client with full identification and account access," Greg said sharply. "You should know that." Jasmine remained still, her gaze locked on Karen like a final verdict. "I'll complete the transaction," Greg said, turning back to Jasmine. "Personally." "Thank you," she said, voice calm but filled with silent fire. As Greg walked her to a private desk, Jasmine turned slightly and spoke, her words aimed directly at Karen. "And for the record, since we're being cautious about fraud, I'm one of the top 5 shareholders in this bank. That includes your salary, your desk, and the policies you just misquoted." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave breaking against stone. Karen's face drained of color. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the keyboard. Her mouth opened, but no apology came. She knew she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Jasmine didn't wait for a response. She sat down across from Greg and calmly laid her documents on the desk once again. The transfer was processed in seconds, but the moment would last forever. The quiet in the bank wasn't just the result of shock. It was the weight of realization. Everyone had seen it. The dismissal, the defiance, the dismantling. No yelling, no threats, just truth, wielded like a blade so sharp it didn't leave blood. Just silence. As she left, Jasmine didn't turn back. She didn't need to. The message had already landed. But the reckoning was only beginning. By the time Jasmine Carter exited the branch that morning, a quiet revolution had already begun. Her heels tapped confidently across the polished marble as she stepped into the bright sunlight. But the real shift wasn't external. It was tectonic. Inside the bank, Karen Whitman still stood frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment, her heart pounding as realization took root. She had tried to diminish someone whose name was embedded in the very fabric of the institution she worked for. Jasmine wasn't just another customer. She was power in plain sight. Outside, Jasmine's driver opened the car door for her. She slid into the back seat with poise, pulled out her phone, and placed a single call. It rang once before connecting. "It happened again," she said. The voice on the other end sighed. "At which branch?" "Union Street. Teller named Karen Whitman. I'll prepare the incident file. Are we escalating this one?" "No," Jasmine said coolly. "We're elevating it." And with that, she ended the call. She wasn't done. Not even close. That night, the story spread quietly through whispers in banking corridors and on secure internal communication threads. The woman Karen had humiliated, Jasmine Carter, was not just a shareholder. She was the second largest individual equity holder in the entire state division. She sat on advisory boards, had influence over leadership appointments, and had even been invited to the last executive retreat in Aspen. And yet no one at the local branch had recognized her. That was the problem. That was always the problem. At her penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Jasmine stood barefoot in her home office, reviewing incident reports submitted to her via encrypted network. The discrimination complaints from clients, especially those from minority communities, were too frequent, too consistent. Different branches, same tone, same pattern, dismissiveness, doubt, devaluation. For years, she had tried to address it from the inside. She'd lobbied for equity audits, suggested frontline staff diversity training, even proposed blind customer service reviews. But each proposal was met with a pat on the head and a deflection wrapped in bureaucratic language. "We're looking into it. We appreciate your passion. We'll bring it up in Q3. No more." This time she had video. One of the customers waiting at the Union Street branch had captured the incident on their phone. Without Jasmine knowing, the brief interaction between her and Karen had been uploaded to a private community forum. Just 30 seconds of footage, but enough to see the cold stare, the snide remarks, in the moment Jasmine calmly dropped the shareholder bombshell. By morning, the clip had been shared to several online networks. At first, it circulated quietly, but then it caught fire. The headline was simple, chilling, and viral. "Bank teller mocks black CEO, then finds out she owns the place." Thousands of comments poured in. She handled it like a boss. This is why quiet power is the most dangerous kind. They never expect the black woman to be the one in charge. Some dismissed it as exaggerated. Others demanded to know if it was real. But those who had seen the look on Karen's face, the shift from arrogant to terrified, knew the truth. And that truth had a name: Jasmine Carter. At the bank's regional headquarters, the executive team was already in damage control mode. The vice president of customer integrity forwarded the video to the legal department. The chief brand officer scheduled an emergency call with PR. And Robert Langford, the regional director, was pacing in his office when his assistant entered, holding a tablet with Jasmine's full portfolio overview. He didn't need to read it. He already knew. Jasmine had warned them years ago. Either we fix this culture, she had said at a previous board meeting, or I will. Now it appeared she was starting to. The next afternoon, Jasmine returned, not to the same branch, but to the corporate tower downtown. She wore a charcoal gray dress suit, understated but flawless. She wasn't here to vent. She wasn't here to collect apologies. She was here to lead. Inside the 25th floor conference room, 5 senior executives sat waiting. They rose as she entered. Jasmine didn't smile. She placed a thick, leather-bound binder on the table. "What's this?" asked Robert, gesturing toward it. Jasmine opened it slowly. 3 years of client discrimination reports. Unresolved, ignored, buried. And I cross-referenced them with customer retention data and local branch turnover rates. You have a pattern, a systemic one. No one moved, no one interrupted. "I'm not just your shareholder," she continued. "I'm your accountability, and I'm giving you one chance to address this from the inside, before the outside takes it from you." Robert looked down. He knew she was right. They all did. Outside the building, the city continued humming as usual. But inside that room, a cultural reckoning had begun. Because Jasmine Carter wasn't playing defense anymore. She was drafting new rules. 3 days after Jasmine Carter's meeting at the regional headquarters, the first internal memo went out. Subject line: Equity Compliance Review, Immediate Action Required. It was terse, urgent, and non-negotiable. Every branch manager across the state received a directive to submit detailed documentation on customer service interactions, flag complaints, and all unusual transaction interruptions from the past 12 months. The message was clear. Corporate wasn't just watching, it was preparing to dig deep. What most employees didn't know was that the woman behind it all wasn't just a disgruntled shareholder. She had become the architect of a quiet overhaul. Inside her private office, Jasmine and a small, trusted team of analysts had been working around the clock. They were cataloging patterns, isolating repeated offenders, and building heat maps of racial bias across the bank's footprint. The numbers were damning. Branches in affluent areas had higher rates of flagged transactions when Black or Latino clients presented large checks or wire requests. Frontline staff at 5 separate locations had rejected verification documents that were later proven to be valid. And worst of all, nearly 60% of discrimination-related customer complaints had no documented resolution. Most were marked customer misunderstanding or training reminder issued. Jasmine closed the report. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't incompetence, it was policy by neglect. Later that evening, a quiet whistleblower reached out. Her name was Chelsea Bryant, a junior associate who had worked at the Elmhurst branch for 4 years. She had seen things, heard things, that never made it into the official reports. She had watched as older white customers were allowed to deposit large sums without identification, while younger Black clients were asked to show multiple forms of ID. She had seen Karen Whitman-style behavior echoed in subtle sneers, jokes behind closed doors, and fake smiles offered to clients deemed sketchy for no reason other than how they dressed or looked. And she had screenshots, emails, chat logs, call transcripts. Jasmine scheduled a private meeting immediately. At a secure co-working suite she leased for discreet meetings, Chelsea sat across from Jasmine, nervously sipping from a paper cup. She didn't want fame. She didn't want revenge. "I just want to stop feeling like I'm complicit," she said quietly. "You're not," Jasmine said. "You're courageous. And we're going to use this, not to destroy people, but to rebuild the system they've corrupted." Chelsea's relief was palpable. But what Jasmine didn't share that night was how far she planned to go. Because the rot was deeper than just Karen. The next week, Jasmine presented her findings to the bank's independent audit committee. The room was filled with stony-faced men in tailored suits and polished shoes. Some had known her for years. Others had only heard the name recently, since the video went viral. She stood before them without notes, without apology. "I have evidence of structural bias within our customer service policies," she began. "I have verified data linking staff behavior to financial loss. And I have corroborated whistleblower testimony showing that our issue isn't just perception, it's protection of bad actors. The room was silent. She let that silence stretch. I've compiled this data not to embarrass the board, but to give you a chance to fix it before the public decides we're unwilling to. She slid a USB drive across the polished table. This includes anonymized complaint reports, staff behavioral audits, and a list of 10 employees who should be immediately suspended pending review. One of the board members, a gray-haired man named Wallace, raised a skeptical eyebrow. And if we decide this should be handled internally? Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. Then I leak it. The room shifted. A cough, a nervous glance. Another board member, younger, maybe late 30s, leaned forward. Ms. Carter, are you threatening the board? No, she replied. I'm saving it. Her voice was calm, measured, but every syllable carried the weight of years spent being underestimated. Wallace leaned back slowly. What do you want? I want a full independent equity audit. I want mandatory anti-bias training for every frontline staffer. I want customer feedback integrated into annual performance reviews. And I want a public commitment to dignity, not just in our mission statement, but in our daily operation. Another silence. But this one was different. It was agreement cloaked in hesitation. One by one, they nodded. After the meeting, Jasmine exited the building and stood at the curb. The city hummed around her, unaware that in a quiet boardroom above, the foundations of a major financial institution had just been shaken. She didn't smile. There was still too much work to do. But deep inside, she knew this was the moment the old system cracked. Not from shouting, not from chaos, but from facts, proof, and an unyielding demand for change. She got into her car and shut the door. Chelsea's message pinged on her phone. Thank you. I watched today's meeting online. I'm proud to know you're on our side. Jasmine stared at the message for a long moment, then typed one word. Always. The next morning, across branches and break rooms, Jasmine Carter's name became something more than a headline. It became a reckoning. The internal memo had gone out overnight. Effective immediately, all employees are required to complete the preliminary equity review assessment by end of business Friday. Some read it with confusion, others with dread, and still others, especially the ones who had quietly hoped someone would finally call out the rot, read it with quiet hope. At the downtown branch on 5th and Morrison, a teller named Anthony Holloway stood behind his counter, blinking at the screen. His hands hovered above the keyboard as he read through the questions. Have you ever witnessed or been aware of a customer being treated differently due to race, gender, or economic appearance? He hesitated. The memory came fast and clear. 3 months ago, he had watched Karen Whitman, yes, that Karen, refused to cash a check for a Hispanic landscaper who walked in still wearing his work boots. Anthony had felt the unease back then, but he hadn't said a word. He was new, still learning, still surviving. But now he typed, yes. Another question, did you report it? He swallowed hard. Number, and then, why not? He paused again, then typed slowly, I thought no one would listen. I thought it wouldn't matter. But now it did. Jasmine had made sure of that. Across town at the Lincoln Park branch, longtime customer service associate Rhonda Patel stared at her own screen, fingers trembling. She had been at the bank for 16 years. She had heard whispers, jokes, passive-aggressive comments. She'd seen managers shuffle black clients to different queues under the pretense of policy. She had buried those moments under compliance meetings and customer satisfaction surveys. But now Jasmine Carter was making everyone ask themselves a question they had spent years avoiding. What have I allowed? Rhonda clicked submit and leaned back in her chair. She thought of the young girl last winter who had come in to open a student checking account and walked away humiliated because someone questioned her ID. She remembered the girl's tearful eyes and quiet voice. I just want to start saving, the girl had said. Now Rhonda wondered if she'd ever come back. That evening, inside a modest townhouse in the suburbs, another kind of awakening unfolded. Lisa Mendez, a Latina assistant branch manager, sat at her kitchen table surrounded by open printouts and a cold cup of coffee. Her teenage son had helped her pull Jasmine Carter's viral video up on the living room TV. He'd even bookmarked the articles from Tech Finance, Bloomberg, and Essence. She watched the clip again, the moment Jasmine leaned in at the teller window and said, "I'm one of the largest shareholders in this bank." Lisa had replayed it 5 times. Not because she was shocked, because she was inspired. She had worked at the bank for nearly a decade. She had ambitions to lead her own branch, but she had also felt the glass ceiling, sometimes from above, sometimes from the side. Colleagues who said she was too emotional. Executives who asked if English was her first language. Even after she led 2 of the top-performing quarters in the region. But now there was Jasmine, a woman who looked like her, a woman who wasn't just demanding change, she was writing it into policy. Lisa picked up her phone and opened her calendar. There was a leadership training program scheduled for next quarter, and applications had just opened. She had never applied before. This time she would. The ripple effect was real. In branches from Chicago to Sacramento, employees who had once remained silent were beginning to speak. Customers were too. A woman in her 60s named Dr. Evelyn Monroe walked into a branch in Atlanta and quietly asked to speak to the manager. When a young black man named Darrell came out to greet her, she reached into her bag and handed him a single printed page. It was a formal complaint, not about money, not about fraud, but about a time 3 years ago when she had been refused service on the assumption her account was dormant, despite it holding over $300,000 in investments. She had never filed the complaint until now. "What changed?" Terrell asked gently. Dr. Monroe smiled faintly. "I saw Jasmine Carter on the news," she said, "and I realized I wasn't the problem. The system was." The story spread like sparks on dry grass. Suddenly, HR inboxes were flooded. Old complaints resurfaced. Anonymous tips rolled in. Not everyone welcomed it. There was fear, resistance, angry whispers from those who called it an overreaction. One senior manager even said it was a PR stunt gone too far. But those voices were growing quieter because the witnesses were awakening. And once people saw the system for what it was, they couldn't unsee it. At the end of that week, Jasmine received a secure report from the audit team. Over 4,200 responses had been logged. Nearly 900 documented incidents of perceived bias. 75 open investigations, 5 resignations, and 1 note. It was unsigned, but it said, "Thank you for giving us permission to see what we were too afraid to admit. We're ready now." Jasmine read the words and sat still. It was beginning. Not just reform, reinvention. Jasmine Carter didn't flinch when the regional audit summary landed in her inbox. She didn't need confirmation of what she already knew, but she needed proof. Cold, indisputable, systemic proof. She slid her reading glasses on, sitting alone in the quiet of her home office. The soft hum of a city morning still pressing against the glass windows. Her fingers hovered above the trackpad as she opened the encrypted file titled Internal Case Log, 5-Year Bias and Misconduct Index. It wasn't one file, it was a folder. Over 300 individual incident reports compiled and categorized. Everything from delayed processing due to unverified identity to manager override, unfounded suspicion of fraud, resolved in client's favor. The spreadsheet scrolled endlessly. Branches, timestamps, victim demographics, internal reviewer comments. And then, an unexpected tab at the bottom of the file caught her attention. Unrecorded incidents, staff journal entries. She clicked, and there they were. Dozens of entries, raw, personal, and unfiltered. Whistleblowers, employees who hadn't submitted formal complaints but had written internal reflections. Some dated back 4 years. Saw manager intercept black man in a tailored suit. Asked 3 times if he was in the right line. No policy broken, but it didn't feel right. Teller number 382, Pasadena branch, May 2021. I denied a customer once because his check looked suspicious. It was a payroll check from a media company. I was told to err on the side of caution. He never came back. CSR, Midwest Region, February 2020. We were instructed in a training to read the room when judging risk profiles. When I asked what that meant, my supervisor said, You'll know when you see it. I've regretted staying quiet ever since. Anonymous, Southeast District, 2019. Jasmine leaned back, her jaw tightening. This wasn't unconscious bias. This was trained bias, and now it was time to document it. She opened her tablet and began drafting what would become the foundational white paper, The Cost of Bias, Financial Discrimination in Modern Banking. It would be backed by data, stories, legal precedent, and the lived experiences of people who had long been dismissed as overreacting. The introduction began with a single line. This report is not an accusation, it is a mirror. Jasmine knew she couldn't just be the figurehead. She had to be the archivist, the witness, the strategist. And the strategist in her knew one thing clearly. Information was leverage, not for revenge, but for transformation. The next week, she convened a private roundtable at the firm's corporate legal department, not in the boardroom, but in a smaller, soundproof strategy pod. No press, no assistants, just her, two lawyers, a compliance officer, and an investigator named Camille Evans. Camille had once led internal fraud detection for a federal agency. Now she specialized in what banks hated to admit: internal bias pipelines. We don't just want policy, Jasmine told her. We want patterns. Camille listened, then nodded. I can give you those patterns, but when we publish this, it's going to shake the foundation. Jasmine held her gaze. That's the point. Within a week, Camille's team had scraped over 40,000 customer service records. Using AI-assisted linguistic analysis, they flagged inconsistencies in language tone based on demographic data. Certain phrases were disproportionately used with Black and Latino customers. We're going to need additional verification. Unfortunately, I can't authorize that at this time. Do you mind waiting while I confirm this? They cross-referenced that with transaction data. The results were staggering. Clients with identical transaction types, same amount, same day, same location, were treated differently based on nothing more than their name or appearance. Jasmine stared at the slide during the presentation. A scatter plot graph danced across the screen. Blue dots, white clients, clustered toward quick approvals. Red dots, clients of color, clustered towards secondary reviews and rejections. You don't need racism to be loud, Camille said softly. Sometimes it just whispers in the math. Jasmine nodded slowly. Let's turn up the volume. They began building a visual case file, an interactive dashboard to be released to the public under the name Banking While Black, a Transparency Initiative. It wouldn't just expose the behavior, it would educate and empower. And it would be the first of its kind. Across the country, bank branches were beginning to whisper the words compliance review. Employees were pulled into retraining. Karen Whitman's story had become a warning label. Don't assume you know who you're speaking to. But inside Jasmine's office, they were building something deeper, a toolkit for customers. What to say when you're denied service. How to document bias in real time. Where to file reports that don't get buried. And it wasn't just tech, it was human. A new department was quietly forming under Jasmine's guidance. The Respect Division, its mission, field live reports of discrimination, escalate incidents directly to compliance, and follow up within 48 hours. It was being staffed by people who had lived through it themselves. Not diversity hires, justice hires. One morning, while reviewing the first testimonial drafts for the public report, Jasmine paused on a page. It was from a college student named Jayla, 19, denied a business account despite having a verified grant. She had written, "It wasn't just the denial, it was the way they looked at me, like I had no right to dream." Jasmine closed the laptop gently. Jayla's sentence would become the report's headline. The right to dream, ending financial gatekeeping in America. Because that's what they were fighting for now. Not just access, but dignity. And no one would gatekeep that again. The morning sun poured into the executive glass suite as Jasmine Carter stood at the front of the conference room, silent. Around the long table sat 12 regional banking executives, mostly men, mostly older, all guarded. Some had flown in, others joined virtually, but every single one of them had read the memo. Mandatory bias review session, led by shareholder Jasmine Carter. They expected a lecture. What they got was a reckoning. Jasmine didn't begin with greetings. She clicked a button on her tablet, and the wall-sized screen behind her flickered to life, displaying a stark image. Denied, the cost of assumption in modern banking. Then, without introduction, she played the first clip. A woman in her 60s, tears threatening to escape, speaking to camera. They told me I couldn't open a joint account with my grandson. Said it looked suspicious. I've raised him since birth. But the teller said we didn't match. I never felt more invisible. Another clip. A man in military uniform. I walked in to deposit my VA check. They flagged it as fraudulent. It took 40 minutes, 3 phone calls, and then they still asked for a second ID. I watched 2 people go through in seconds. The only difference? I was the only one who looked like me. Jasmine turned off the video. Silence, and no one dared speak. This isn't a trend, Jasmine began. This is a pattern, a culture, one we've all either ignored or enabled. She moved to the next slide. Customer Complaint Heat Map, 2018 to 2023. Red splotches lit up major metro branches. The hotter the red, the more verified discrimination reports. Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Newark, Charlotte. In 5 years, over 300 verified complaints tied to racial bias, she said flatly. Less than 8% of them led to corrective action. Only 1 person was terminated. Guess who? The room said nothing. Karen Whitman, she answered herself. The teller who treated me like a fraud suspect in my own bank. One executive finally cleared his throat. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, what exactly are you expecting here? We've issued statements. Our compliance team is reviewing all outstanding cases. Jasmine's eyes turned to him, direct, calm, unblinking. I'm not here for statements. I'm here for systems. She held up a thin binder. This is a prototype of a new operational model, respect-based banking. She passed it around. No silent bias, no performative training. This includes an end-to-end customer equity pipeline. Every interaction tracked. Every incident reviewed by an independent equity board, not HR. Another executive scoffed. You want to create an oversight committee that overrides management? No, Jasmine said coolly. I want to create a system where management doesn't get to hide behind policy when they choose silence over justice. She clicked again. Next slide. Employee testimonies. Anonymous internal submissions. We're told not to escalate complaints unless we think they'll make the news. I've seen managers override approvals based on what the client was wearing. The room began to shift uncomfortably. An older VP muttered, These are cherry-picked. No, Jasmine countered. These are the ones that survived. Most don't make it to the record. You know that. She pulled out a printed contract. This is a shareholder motion. I'm calling for an emergency vote to establish the Equity Accountability Division. Gasps. A legal counsel whispered to the CFO. Jasmine continued. This division will oversee all internal bias reports. It will have budget autonomy, and it will report to the board, not to executive leadership. You don't have the votes, one executive snapped. Yet, Jasmine answered. She reached into her briefcase and retrieved a folder marked Confidential. Internal coalition. Then she passed it down the line. Inside, statements of support from 9 major institutional shareholders, 5 civil rights groups, and a newly formed whistleblower coalition. By the time the folder reached the end of the table, jaws had tightened. You think I just walked into this bank one day and made noise? She said. Number, I've been building this case for years, silently, like you taught me. She turned to the screen again. A final image loaded. A young girl, no more than 12, seated at a kitchen table. She was holding a sign. One day I want to open a business account, without a fight. My niece, Jasmine said softly. She watched the video of me standing at the teller. She asked me, why didn't they believe you? She looked around the room, making eye contact with each executive. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to force you to choose. One final click. 2 buttons appeared on the screen. Approve systemic reform. Reject. Shareholder vote pending. One by one, hands raised, first tentatively, then confidently. 8 voted yes, 2 abstained, 2 opposed. Majority carried. Jasmine turned toward the board secretary. File it today, announce it tomorrow. The secretary nodded. As the executive stood, shaken but silent, Jasmine packed her things. No dramatics, no victory dance. Only purpose. Outside the glass walls of the suite, the bank continued its daily hum. Customers coming, transactions flowing, emails pinging. But inside, everything had changed. A system had just been confronted. A line had been drawn. And Jasmine Carter, once mocked at the counter, had just rewritten the rulebook. The next morning, headlines broke across financial networks. Carter forces equity vote at bank headquarters. Historic reform initiative passes. Shareholder Jasmine Carter drives racial accountability policy into corporate banking. Discrimination at the teller window sparks institutional overhaul. Inside the same building where she had once been humiliated, Jasmine Carter's name now commanded respect. Not as a customer, not even as just a shareholder, but as a reformer. Her policy, titled the Equity Accountability Directive, became the most read internal document within 24 hours of being filed. But the spotlight she had drawn now cast shadows, deep, wide, and panicked. Across the regional branches, managers scrambled to adjust. Internal emails were leaked. Any past employee complaints, review them now. Priority 1. Don't let corporate catch you with unresolved bias incidents. Scrub your logs. And then came the real fracture. A junior analyst in HR posted anonymously on LinkedIn, "If you're just now discovering bias in your bank system, you were the system." The post went viral, over 6,000 comments, countless internal shares. Many employees nodded silently behind screens. Others spoke up for the first time. A wave of internal testimonies began to surface, not from customers, but from tellers, support staff, even assistant branch managers. Stories of being overlooked, disrespected, underpaid, or silenced. Jasmine watched it unfold from a glass-paneled office high above downtown. The equity division had been operational for only 48 hours, and already over 100 verified submissions had flooded in. Greg Simmons, the regional director, who had originally backed her in the confrontation, now sat nervously across from her. His tie was loosened, his brow furrowed. "This is spiraling," he said. "It's no longer about one incident. We're looking at a structural earthquake." "Exactly," Jasmine replied. "Which means the foundation wasn't sound to begin with." He rubbed his temples. "We're losing investor confidence. The board is pushing for a statement, some assurance that this isn't going to sink the ship." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me to clean the leak and pretend the hull isn't rusted?" Greg looked away. She leaned forward, calm but direct. "Make the full audit public." He blinked. "You want to release the entire discrimination report? That's suicide." "No," she corrected. "It's accountability." She stood and walked to the window. "You can't restore trust if the people you harmed don't even know what you've been hiding." Greg hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. 2 days later, the bank made the unprecedented move, a full public release of its internal bias audit. The document, 93 pages long, detailed not only Jasmine's incident, but over 200 similar cases dating back 6 years. The fallout was immediate. News anchors shook their heads in disbelief. Civil rights organizations issued statements applauding the transparency, but demanding more. Customers flooded the bank's social channels. Some closed accounts. Others opened new ones to support the change. The institution was now in open surgery, its past bleeding into public view, its future uncertain. But Jasmine didn't retreat. She doubled down. In the week that followed, she launched a new initiative, the Equity Banking Fellowship, a year-long paid program for minority interns interested in finance. Funded not just by her, but by the shareholders who had joined her movement, the program promised a pipeline of new voices trained to challenge systems, not fit into them. More allies began to emerge. A vice president from a competing bank called to offer partnership. A Black-owned credit union offered mentorship to her incoming fellows. A retired civil rights lawyer sent her a personal note. "Thank you for doing from inside what we fought for from outside." But even as support grew, the institution began to splinter. Internal factions formed. Some executives supported Jasmine's reforms. Others resented them. A leaked internal memo from a senior VP read, "We're losing autonomy. We're being bullied into cultural compliance." The phrase cultural compliance sparked backlash. Activists reposted the memo with hashtags like, "Yashas compliance isn't the problem, and racism isn't autonomy." That VP quietly resigned 2 days later. The dominoes didn't stop there. An internal review team flagged dozens of managers who had suppressed customer complaints for years. 4 were terminated, 7 more placed on leave. 3 sued the bank, alleging wrongful termination and hostile restructuring. Jasmine refused to flinch. She appeared on CNBC that week, not to gloat, but to clarify. "I'm not burning the institution down," she said. "I'm rebuilding it with better blueprints." Her tone wasn't angry. It was executive, measured, unapologetic. The interviewer asked her what she would say to those who believed she was overreaching, letting a personal incident morph into a corporate revolution. Jasmine looked into the camera. "If one moment can reveal a broken system, then that moment is enough. We don't wait for 100 cracks to fix the foundation." The clip aired globally. Within hours, bank stock dipped again, but by the next morning it began to recover, faster than expected. Investors realized something Jasmine had always known. Systems built on respect, transparency, and inclusion weren't liabilities. They were assets. By month's end, the bank announced a new public motto: access, accountability, equity. It was a start, but Jasmine wasn't done. She had begun drawing plans for something far more radical. A new kind of bank, one she would own. From the vault to the vision, it wasn't revenge, it was evolution. And the system that once mocked her, it was now following her lead. Jasmine Carter stood inside a vast sunlit atrium that was still under construction. The marble floors were unfinished, the ceiling ducts still exposed. But to her, this space wasn't incomplete. It was becoming. Just like the system she was building. Behind her, the newly installed logo glinted off the glass wall. Liberty Wells, banking reimagined. This wasn't just a bank, it was her declaration. A financial institution designed from the ground up to reverse what she had endured. Not with slogans, with systems. Every policy, every hiring practice, every digital portal built to see people, not stereotype them. This wasn't about optics. This was about infrastructure of dignity. And already the walls were humming with preparation. Her team of advisors moved with purpose. Former executives who had resigned from the old bank in solidarity, data scientists who had built inclusive fintech apps, even a compliance officer from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, now working directly for Jasmine to help build unbiased accountability structures into the company's DNA. Elijah Nguyen, her head of community investment, approached her with a tablet in hand. "Final review of the charter," he said. Jasmine scrolled through the document. One line caught her eye. "Liberty Wells will operate with transparency, auditing itself before others ever need to." She nodded. "Publish it." "Publicly?" "Yes," she replied. "Let everyone know what we're made of, before they ask." Word spread quickly. Major financial outlets picked up the headline. "Black woman-owned bank publishes equity charter before first branch opens." Inside Liberty Wells' PR room, a content strategist monitored real-time feedback. "Sentiment's 82% positive," she reported. "Most frequent terms are refreshing, overdue, finally." But the feedback wasn't only public. Within a week, Jasmine received a private invitation to speak at the Federal Reserve Symposium on inclusive banking. She turned it down. Instead, she sent her assistant director of policy, a young black woman fresh out of grad school. Jasmine's message was simple: "We don't rise alone. Take the seat." But while Jasmine was building forward, Greg Simmons, the former regional bank director, was quietly trying to clean up the past. After Jasmine's reforms took hold, the National Bank had initiated a board-level investigation. And in that process, Greg came under fire. Not for opposing Jasmine, but for what he didn't report. Records showed Greg had dismissed several internal complaints from junior staff regarding Karen Whitman's conduct over the years. Now the question was, did he protect her? When called before the review committee, Greg told the truth. I didn't act. I was scared of making noise, he admitted. But silence was worse. His admission didn't save his position. He resigned days later. But Jasmine didn't rejoice. She issued a public statement. Accountability must be honest, not vengeful. Change doesn't begin by making examples. It begins by making systems that prevent silence in the first place. The media praised her grace, but Jasmine didn't offer it for show. She offered it because she knew how reform truly works. Meanwhile, Liberty Wells' first digital app went live. It included features no other bank had ever implemented: a respect score system for branches, tracking customer feedback on fair treatment, an equity bot powered by AI designed to flag and escalate potentially biased decision patterns, a Tell Us First button on every page, allowing users to report microaggressions, no matter how small. The fintech world took notice. So did the regulators. But perhaps the most surprising reaction came from customers of the old bank. A woman named Teresa James posted a video to TikTok. I walked into my old bank for the last time today. They treated me like I didn't exist, again. Then I opened an account at Liberty Wells. I was greeted by name. They asked how I wanted to be addressed. You don't go back after that. Her video hit 2.3 million views in 48 hours. More followed. Soon Jasmine's name trended not for a single viral moment, but for a sustained movement. In private, her team celebrated cautiously, but Jasmine reminded them, this isn't about being better than the banks before us. This is about being braver. By the end of Q2, Liberty Wells had exceeded every projection. 100,000 accounts open, over $40 million in community reinvestments, branch requests from 17 new cities, and most importantly, 0 unresolved discrimination complaints. But her mission wasn't complete. In a closed-door summit with social impact investors, Jasmine announced her next phase. Liberty Wells will offer 0 collateral business loans to minority founders with clean credit and a 3-year vision. No more begging to be seen. The room erupted in applause. Outside that building, a protest was forming against another bank accused of discriminatory lending. The contrast was stark. Inside, solutions. Outside, suffering. A journalist asked Jasmine that night, "Do you think your bank will replace the others?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I don't want to replace them," she said. "I want to make them irrelevant." The next morning, Liberty Wells posted a simple message across every platform. Respect shouldn't be a premium feature. No hashtags, no logo, just truth. And it spread like wildfire. The institutions that had mocked her, dismissed her, or tried to sideline her were now studying her. Jasmine didn't gloat. She planned. Because change wasn't about loud victories. It was about quiet revolutions written into every policy, every paycheck, every transaction. And her revolution was just beginning. The story of Jasmine Carter was no longer just whispered between cubicles or reposted on social media. It had taken root, permanently etched into boardroom discussions, banking regulations, business school case studies, and public consciousness. She hadn't set out to spark a movement, but by holding the mirror up to a system built on assumptions, she made one truth undeniable: dignity is not negotiable. Inside the headquarters of Liberty Wells, Jasmine sat in a quiet lounge overlooking the city. Her suit jacket was folded neatly beside her. The skyline outside buzzed with motion, but the atmosphere around her was still. Not because she was done, but because she had finally and fully arrived. A small plaque had just been installed on the wall of the building's main entrance. It read, "This institution was born from a moment of disrespect. It now exists to ensure no one else endures the same." She hadn't written those words. A junior copywriter had proposed it during a brainstorm. When Jasmine saw it, she didn't edit a single syllable. Because that one sentence captured what she had always believed. Real power isn't seized, it's built. One policy, one voice, one refusal to shrink. Her leadership team gathered in the boardroom down the hall waiting for her. A quarterly investor call was set to begin in 20 minutes. Liberty Wells was outperforming nearly every benchmark in its peer class. But Jasmine wasn't preparing for a report. She was preparing for a message. Across the city in a less glamorous neighborhood, a young girl named Aaliyah walked into her local Liberty Wells branch. She wore a denim jacket and scuffed sneakers, clutching a manila envelope filled with application forms for a youth entrepreneurship grant. The branch manager greeted her with a smile. "Welcome, Aaliyah. You're right on time." The girl blinked. "You know my name?" He nodded. "We do our homework around here." She smiled back, nervous but inspired. That was the real win. Not just boardrooms or headlines, but small doors opened for people who'd never been invited in. Back at headquarters, Jasmine stepped into the boardroom as the call began. Her team was already seated: Elijah, Teresa, Marcus, and others who had helped her shape this vision from a single humiliating encounter at a teller counter into a nationwide model of what banking could be. "Good afternoon," Jasmine said, her voice steady, eyes focused on the camera lens. "Let's begin." She walked them through metrics, growth, compliance stats. But in the final 10 minutes, she paused. Then, with calm deliberation, she delivered the words that would be replayed on every major news outlet within the hour. "This quarter, we did more than grow. We proved something. We proved that institutions built on empathy can outperform those built on fear. We proved that people want fairness, not just features. And we proved that one moment of bias, if met with courage, can reshape an entire industry." She paused again, letting the words settle. "We didn't get here because of a dress code. We got here because someone looked at a woman like me and assumed I didn't belong. But what they didn't know was, I built the room they tried to keep me out of." The call ended, but the ripple had just begun. That evening, Jasmine was asked to deliver a keynote at the National Banking Ethics Forum. She accepted. On stage, she wore no blazer, no power heels, just a simple dress and a pin that read, "See me?" She told the story, from the cold glance at the bank counter to the corporate silence that followed, from Karen Whitman's smirk to Greg Simmons' soft excuse of just policy, from that first moment of humiliation to the moment she realized her response would write the legacy, not theirs. And when she closed, she looked into the camera and said, "To every young woman watching this, every professional of color, every entrepreneur who's ever been told you don't belong, they're wrong. You don't have to wait for a seat at their table. Build your own. Then open the doors wide enough for everyone." The crowd stood, not out of politeness, but because truth, when spoken plainly, moves people. In the days that followed, other banks began reviewing their customer service policies. Some issued preemptive apologies. Others scrambled to partner with inclusion consultants. But Jasmine didn't chase partnerships. She didn't need to, because Liberty Wells wasn't a reaction. It was a replacement. 1 year later, Jasmine walked through the doors of her original branch, the one where it all began. A new face greeted her, a young teller with nervous hands and a sincere smile. "Welcome to Liberty Wells. How can I help you today?" Jasmine smiled. "You already have." As she walked toward the executive offices, a black and white photo caught her eye. It was her, taken on the day Liberty Wells opened. Behind her, a quote was etched into the glass wall. "Change doesn't always knock. Sometimes it walks in and demands to be seen." That's what Jasmine had done. She hadn't knocked. She entered. She rewrote the rules. And in doing so, she left behind something bigger than a brand or a business. She left behind a blueprint for dignity. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.